Hi, this is Ed Pullen, your host on the Bird Banter podcast, where birders talk birding. Today, on episode number 4, I'm excited to have Christian Hagenlacher as my guest. Christian's well known in the birding community for his 2016 ABA Big Year, also for the Birding Project, and soon for a book coming out in May. I'm excited to have you here today, Christian. Welcome.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be here with you today.
It's really good. Christian, I like to start out by giving my guests just a few minutes to tell their birding story. Everybody got their start somewhere in birding, and how did you get going? And give me a brief rundown of what's happened between then and now.
Sure. Well, my birding story is kind of multifaceted, and it starts with both my grandmothers at a very young age. Both of them had influences on me in their own unique ways. My grandmother on the East Coast, my dad's mom, had a bird feeder in her yard in Vermont. And so I grew up watching cardinals and blue jays coming to her bird feeder, and I was just really amazed.
Did you visit there? Were you living there?
I was living there at the time.
Oh, in Vermont.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. My grandmother, who lived near Seattle, Washington, she was another influence on me, and she had peregrine falcons nesting on the building that she worked in, the Washington Mutual Tower. It's a great bird. And so I'd come and visit her at work and try and find the falcons sitting on her building.
Urban canyons.
Stewart and Bell.
Yes.
Nesting peregrine falcons.
They have the video cam there, I think.
They do, yes. Yeah. You could watch them in the lobby.
Cool. And so you had some early experiences with your grandparents. How did you have mentors, or how did you get going?
I did have mentors growing up. It was really neat. My interest in birding really evolved and grew as I grew up. And I never started using binoculars to see birds until high school.
That's my son. He says, I don't need those binoculars, Dad. I can see him great.
That was me. My main interest from being exposed to falcons at an early age were raptors, which you don't need binoculars to notice a red-tailed hawk on a telephone pole as you pass by. So I was really interested in raptors until high school, when one of my mentors, who was the athletic director at my school, he introduced me to high-quality German optics, and from then on I was hooked. So
had Zeiss?
So warblers, I did have Zeiss.
Oh, wow.
So
Figures.
Warblers, vireos, tanagers, all of those became
the beautiful,
reachable.
colorful birds on the east.
They were.
Yeah, good. And then, then you went to college. Mm-hmm. And when did you get hooked and really into it? You got the Birding Project thing going and all of that.
Right. So I was hooked early on in high school and kind of became more competitive with birding, really trying to spend my days seeking out birds I'd never seen before.
So eBird then?
eBird
then. That was around the beginning of eBird.
That was the beginning of eBird. So yeah. I was an early user. And
that's when everybody kept score.
Right. And so I used eBird as a tool to search out rare birds, and would often go on chases around the Midwest looking for birds that I hadn't seen.
So you were in the Midwest by then?
I was.
Okay.
My story jumps around through all of the major migratory flyways.
Very nice.
So I was living in St. Louis and chasing birds on afternoons and weekends in high school, and that's really when the interest took hold and developed. I read the book, The Big Year, and realized that competitive birding was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And although it wasn't my thing at the time, I was mostly using the competitive aspect of it to fill in those holes on my life list to see new birds. That's really what interested me.
Sure. And when did the whole idea of a big year that you did in 2016, how did that happen?
Well, that whole idea really evolved in 2016.
It kind of spur of the moment thing.
It was a spur of the moment thing, following in the footsteps of
the accidental big year the year before.
Yeah, Neil Hayward. And so I followed his journey and knew what big years were. I knew the basic strategy.
You know what you're getting into.
And I knew what I was getting into. A lot of challenges came up, and I was wrapping up a film project with a producer. We were making a film for PBS about greater prairie chickens.
Oh yeah, I saw that on your website.
And telling the story of the American tallgrass prairie. So the funding goals had been reached for that project. Most of it had been filmed, and we were in post-production. Mm-hmm. And I was living in Montana and working with him on that project. And he gave me some money and said, why don't you start filming some rare birds to add to our film library?
Very nice.
And so I started traveling in January, filming rare birds for him. And some of the funding fell through, and I found myself cut off from that project. And
that was about when in 2016?
That was about the second week of January.
Okay, so you have most of the year left, and
Yes.
you'd already seen some rarities.
I'd seen some rarities. I'd photographed some rarities and filmed some rarities for him, and I kept going for the month of January, relying on my savings, and I ended up seeing over 360 birds in the month of January.
Wow.
And that was a very good start. I realized
Yeah,
I was
that's-
ahead of the pace of most past big years.
You're rocking it by then.
Yeah.
Cool. So you spent your time in the South to begin with, mostly?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm assuming.
I started here in Seattle, January 1st, and crossed the ferry to British Columbia, and then drove down the coast, down I-5 all the way down to San Diego,
Okay.
and then crossed through Arizona, Texas, all the way to Florida.
So you swept up the wintering southern birds.
I got all the wintering southern birds.
The Mexican birds that snuck across, probably.
Exactly. So I kind of strategically hit some of the rare birds first.
What were some of your early highlights?
Oh, the early highlights. Well, day one, the first bird of my big year was a barn owl flying across the road. And
It's a good start.
And an owl, any species of owl is a good start.
Yeah.
So that was a highlight.
I followed Dorian Anderson on his biking big year,
Yes.
maybe a year or two before that.
Yes.
And his start with a snowy owl in January 1st on his bicycle at 6 a.m. was
It's
a
exhilarating.
great start.
Yeah. So I chased rarities. So I ended up seeing, let's see, it was a thrush in British Columbia, red wing.
Oh, yeah.
An Asian thrush.
We had that in Olympia several years
neat.
ago. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's a great bird.
It is cool.
So I saw that and then made my way down through California and ended up seeing the brown boobies off the coast of San Diego, and then across Arizona where I got the flame-colored tanager.
Yeah, that's a
and
good one.
the Sinaloa wren and some thrushes, some rare thrushes.
Yeah.
And so clay-colored thrush in Texas, and just kind of worked my way across the southern United States.
Very cool. And then around then, you decided to do the big year.
Then I ran out of money. And so I really was going for a big month and spending every dollar I had trying to maximize the birds and minimize the expenses.
Sure.
So I slept out of the back of my Subaru. I ate at McDonald's and largely was self-supported that first month and realized I needed a job. So at the end of the month, I got a job washing dishes, and I lived on an island and was a kitchen assistant. So I washed dishes, I served food.
Sure.
And so I was in the hospitality industry for the month of February.
Uh-huh.
And I did that off the coast of southern Georgia. So I was close.
Worst places?
I was close to any rarities that showed up in Florida. And that was the strategy, was on my days off, I could chase rare birds, and that paid off.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. And then take me through the year, sort of in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So from there, I crossed the country several times across the southern United States in March and April, and hitting spring migration, getting the spring chickens in the Mountain West, rosy finches, owls up in frozen Colorado and Wyoming
Sure, and
at the
chickens.
time. Then I kept on hitting spring migration pretty hard across the southern United States. I ended up driving back to California and birding my way through California up to Washington on that repositioning cruise where
Right.
we
I
met.
remember that, yes.
I visited the biggest week in American birding, cleaning up those spring migrants, and then I headed to Alaska. And I was fortunate enough to get on a pelagic trip on the way to Attu.
Oh, cool.
And spend almost 3 weeks in Alaska looking for rare birds.
It's a dream I've always had and have yet to pull off. I need to pull a trigger on that.
You should. There's spots still left on this year's
I've heard
Attu
there
trip.
are. I've heard there are.
Shameless plug.
Are you going to be on that?
We'll see. We can talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So you kind of hit the vagrants in the islands of Alaska, and I think you went to Nome and the Anchorage and the usual
Yes.
more common spots in
Yes.
Alaska.
And then I spent the summer kind of cleaning up birds that I missed. And my goal, believe it or not, was just to see 700 species.
Well,
So,
700, I mean, when I grew up in birding over the last year, 700 was a big number.
And it still is.
It still is a good number.
Yeah.
But, with some of the splits and the eBird, which just makes it so convenient to hear about things. You don't need to be on a telephone hotline like you used to have to or anything.
Exactly.
So
Technology's
you can
definitely
find,
changed
you
the
can
field.
hear about them within hours and
Right.
get to them if you really want to be a lister.
Right. And so I spent the summer months cleaning up. I drove across the country from Seattle to Maine and ended up working at Audubon Camp, Hog Island Audubon.
Oh, yes.
Which is just a very special place, rich in history.
Yeah.
Roger Torrey Peterson, Ken Kaufman, Scott Wyden, all of them.
Our local Audubon has sent youth to that occasionally.
That's money well spent.
It is a great thing. Yeah.
So that's a wonderful opportunity. I was privileged to be invited there and spend some time there and see my year Atlantic puffin and razorbill with young teenage birds.
Roseate tern.
Roseate terns.
Probably northern gannet, a few others, yes.
So beautiful spot.
Yeah.
And I got Bicknell's thrush when I was in New England, which was a life bird despite growing up in Vermont.
I just got that a couple of years ago. I grew up in Maine.
It's a spectacular bird.
It's cool.
So summer months I kind of spent cleaning up. I did another Alaska trip to Nome to get the breeding birds.
Mm-hmm.
And then spent the fall on the island of Gamble, just off the coast of Nome, St. Lawrence Island.
Okay.
I said it was an island. Gamble's the town that I birded in on St. Lawrence Island. And then kind of played catch up and hit some of the fall and winter birds, chickens and owls, and then spent the end of the month, December, chasing a couple more rarities and searching for dovekie off the coast of Cape Cod.
Yeah. Do you have that yet?
I did see a dovekie. I didn't count it. It was difficult choice, but not quite the view I want to be sure that that's what it was.
That's still one of my target birds. I have not.
I'd like better looks, and I know they're out there, but some years they're in great numbers, and sadly 2016 was not one of those years.
The years I've visited Maine in the winter have not been the right years. Yeah, I grew up in Maine, so that's why I mentioned my family's back there. I go back quite a lot in the summer. And it's so hard traveling in the winter. I try not to get stuck in the Chicago airport or someplace.
I know what Maine in winter's like. I was born there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where?
In Brunswick.
Brunswick. I went to school at Bowdoin.
Oh, okay.
I went to Bowdoin College, and it was my undergrad school.
Very neat.
I know the area pretty well.
That's great.
Still have friends there. Cool. So you finished up your big year. What was your number?
I saw officially 752 species.
That is ridiculously cool. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I read I heard a podcast. I heard Laura Keene. Was she the photographer who did the photographic big year?
Yes, she was.
And she was on a podcast with, I think, the Birders Digest podcast, This American Birding or something like that. And she spoke highly of you as a incredibly talented, ambitious, crazy birder who had to work part of your way through the year while the rest of them relied on more reliable funding.
Sure. Laura's an extremely talented photographer and a very close friend of mine.
Yeah, cool.
Unlike the big year narrative that's shown in Hollywood of big year birders being
bitter competition
at each other's throat, but at the same time, some being friends. 2016 was definitely a very dramatic year for the first time in history, 4 big year birders, all going for the record in a serious attempt.
And 2 of you, yourself and Olaf, being fairly public about it with a blog, and the Australian fellow, I'm blanking on
John.
It was a little harder to follow. He didn't eBird regularly or hardly at all, and so it's a little. You saw his numbers here and there, but they were harder to follow. And then Laura just did it, and I didn't hear much about it at the time.
Right. I think that landscape of how big year birders are sharing their year with others is changing. And I'm pleased to have started off with the goal to share my big year and to be working throughout the year at connecting people with birds. That was part of my EPIC mission of the Birding Project.
Right. So tell us more about the Birding Project and EPIC. I kind of get the E, the I, and the C. The P, I don't quite understand. I mean, how how that's working for you.
Sure. And so the Birding Project I started at the end of January and during the month of February on my big year as an outreach arm of doing a big year. Most big years usually revolved around the personality of the birders.
Right.
If you think about record-breaking big years, you have a name, historically a male, a white older male attached to the big year, which seems to be, in a lot of people's minds, the only demographic for big year birders, but that can't be further from the truth. And so I really tried to have my big year, instead of it revolving around me, revolving around the ideas that I was trying to incorporate into the big year. And so I came up with an acronym, EPIC, for my big year. The E is to engage people with birds, promoting learning.
You did a good job of that.
Thank you. The P was to preserve bird habitat in urban and rural areas.
And I saw that. Is that a longer term goal, or how is that working?
Definitely. Bird habitat preservation isn't something that you can really just, go out one day and check the box at the end of the day and say, yep, we did that.
Yeah.
So throughout the year, part of the engaging people and educating people helps to preserve that habitat.
Sure.
There were many opportunities I had to work with different stewards of the land and different conservation organizations to actually help them do habitat restoration. I helped reseed a prairie with native prairie plants in urban Illinois, just outside the suburbs of Chicago. And that's where I saw bobolinks and other birds. And so I tried to specifically go to places that I knew I could make a difference.
Very cool. Very cool. And then the I and the C?
So the I stands for inspire, and birds are naturally inspiring to me and uplifting my thought. And I dealt with a lot of challenges throughout the year, and focusing on birds helped teach me life lessons. And so I thought that my actions, how I approached doing a big year, the attitude that I had, and the work that I was doing, I was hoping would be an inspiration for others.
Very cool. Very cool. We'll get to your book here in a little bit, but hopefully that will be one more part of your inspiration.
It's definitely ongoing.
Good. And the C is?
Connect birds and habitat, connect people and birds using technology responsibly.
I get that, the technology tell us the technology responsible part of that, responsibly part of that phrase.
Sure. Well, we've discussed a little bit of the impacts of eBird and how technology is really changing the birding landscape and changing what doing a big year looks like.
Right.
With information at our fingertips, it's easy to chase after birds or to know where birds are. So that element of mystery is now out of the equation. But with technology at everyone's fingertips comes an ethical responsibility to use that technology in a way that doesn't hurt birds or doesn't impact them negatively. So responsible use of playback, of trying to attract birds or get a bird to come out or show itself at a rare bird stakeout.
I watched your baiting owls video.
Sure.
Disgusting. God,
unfortunately, baiting owls is still a practice that many photographers are doing right now. It's February.
It was shocking. Check it out on the Birding Project. I don't remember the date of that video, but I bet if you...
I posted it during February.
Is there a search bar
season
on your site? I'm not sure. But anyway, I just looked at it and I said, baiting owls? How do you bait an owl?
It's a recent blog post, relatively speaking, under the blog section, so you can find it there.
Yeah, wow. You should check it out. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool to see, pretty awful to see too.
There are some neat photos attached to that blog, and I reached out to a community of photographers to say I'd like to solicit photos that you would like to share that have been taken of owls responsibly. So all of the pictures of great gray owls and other species in that blog post are all from other photographers. They're not my own works.
Who don't do that kind of junk.
Who don't do that. And so I'm hoping that through that blog post you can see you don't need to treat owls in an unethical way to get the shot.
Yeah, cool. So your website, thebirdingproject.com, easy to check out. I'll put a link in the podcast notes. But since then, you've moved on. It's been all of 2007. That was 2016, 17, and 18, and a little bit of 19. So 2 and a little bit years since then. What's happened?
So I returned to teaching after the Birding Project and my big year, and with little maintenance to the website. Right now I'm working on overhauling the website and adding some new features and creating a store space. But since then I've been teaching at a high school, an alternative high school in the mountains of Colorado. It's a residential school, and so there's 12 students or 13 students right now that live there on campus. And the focus is character development and challenging activities other than academics. So we rock climb, snow ski, whitewater kayak. We do a lot of really
pretty cool stuff.
It doesn't feel like work most days. Yeah. And so it's been a privilege to be there and to be working with high school age students.
How did you even hear about that again? Did you get a break? How'd you get a job like that? That sounds like a pretty cool job.
It is very cool. I had a mentor growing up who actually founded the school.
Oh, okay.
And so there was a personal connection there.
Not what you know, but who you know. That always helps.
Exactly. And so I ended up returning to that school for a week during my big year in March, and took a week off of birding spring migration to help teach students about birds. They were doing an ornithology unit. And so I helped them. We went on an expedition to the canyon country in New Mexico, and ended up, learning about ancestral Puebloans and the importance that birds played in that culture. And it was a very neat trip and time very well spent. And also it was nice to have a paycheck for a week of work.
Yeah, that always helps too.
Yeah.
That always helps too, especially when you're living frugally, as it sounds like you were on your big year. So you've written a book. Tell us about that. That was probably part of the plan, at least in the back of your mind as you were doing the year.
Definitely. And not only in the back of my mind, it was in the front of my mind as I was doing a big year. I really lived day to day. And so I was conscious the whole time of the fact that I was writing my story. And that helped keep me engaged. It helped keep me moving forward, because I realized that this was my story and I was living it and I had full control over it. If I got discouraged and gave up and sat in one spot for a week,
that was on you.
It was on me, and that was my story. And so I wrote each day, and actually wrote a lot of
So some of it is, real-time writing almost.
Yes, and I've had to edit it and change it now to past tense and make everything in agreement, telling the story now, 3 years later.
Right.
But I wrote a lot of it on the road, on my phone, speaking of technology.
Talking to Siri.
Not just to Siri, but to voice memos. I recorded my story as I was driving, and a lot of that, as I've tried to listen and take things out of that, the road noise actually overrides a lot of what I was saying.
I'm sure.
And so it's been fun to fill in those gaps and go back through photos and videos and the blog posts that I wrote on the road during the year and construct most of my story.
I remembered that as I followed you during your big year, part of your aim for the year was to interview or meet and talk with, if not interview, a lot of people, birders and other people. Is that part of your book, is talking about some of those things? Or?
That's a great question. I referred to some of the things that other birders said or taught me as I was doing these interviews, realizing these underlying truths to what attract people to birds, or what captivate us, or what birds have to teach us. I began to hear themes the more I talked to people.
Sure.
And realized that those weren't just true for them, but they were also true for me
Almost
as well.
Universal truths.
Yeah. And so I share some of those universal truths that echoed out of many voices. But a lot of those interviews I actually recorded on my iPhone and have those interviews. And,
very cool.
And that's still part of the birding project that has yet to unfold. I'd like to do a book just of those interviews, or some sort of podcast or digital story with all of these different voices. I also photographed portraits of hundreds of birders and took photos of their hands holding their binoculars, which are as unique
I
and
remember
individual
seeing some of those,
as the stories that come.
on your blog posts as the year went through.
Right. That content wasn't engaging to the people that were really following my story, and so I transitioned out of interviewing birders and posting those daily or weekly to less seldom, as I realized people didn't care about other people's stories. They wanted to hear
your story.
Yeah.
This was your big year.
Yeah. So now those people have, or they will have, a book that chronicles my story, and my story is woven in with the other big ear birders, but I've tried to avoid going into, the drama and the different things that are part of the other big ear birders story. So my book, for those of you that are wanting the juicy details on Olaf and John's rivalry, my book isn't the place for that.
That was a little of the not so fun to read about part of that whole year for me.
Yeah. And it's interesting because some birders love that, and I get asked questions about them pretty often, and I don't speak in detail of that very often because that's not my story or part of my year. And so
I think John is doing another big year now, isn't he?
He is, yes.
I just, from looking at the eBirds, I'm just, my goodness, he's knocking off birds. So this guy is just crazy.
He's crazy in a good way. He's crazy about
I don't
birds.
know him, but I mean,
and
just
he loves North American birds. He's lived in Australia for a long time.
He did the biggest big year ever in Australia,
Yes.
and then the biggest big year ever in the ABA,
Yes.
continental ABA area, and now he's at it again in 5 or 6 years time frame. So
Right.
holy
And
mackerel.
I think John doing a second ABA big year says something a little bit about big years. The first time he did it, he had an amazing count and a lot of scrutiny on some birds that he saw or the way that he did it. And so the fact that he's doing it again, I really admire, because he's taking a more deliberate approach, being very transparent in his experiences. He's sharing amazing stories of the birds that he's seeing, the people that
Does
he's
he have a
meeting.
blog or something?
He does.
I have not followed this year.
He does. And I don't want to say what I think it is and have it be wrong. So why don't we just put that in your blog notes? I'll get that to you.
Okay, yeah, I'll find that link
Yeah.
and put it. It's easy. Can't be hard to find.
But I think that it says something towards his approach, because he's doing it right this year. Not that he did it wrong the first time, but he's
He's being very meticulous.
he's taking a purposeful approach and including others. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing him enjoy this year.
Yeah, good for
with
him.
all of the rewards that come from doing it that way.
Yeah, yeah. He was sort of in the background a little bit that year, especially with Olaf being so, writing these gigantic blog posts. I had to quit partway through the year. They were so long I couldn't read them. But it was fun to read. I mean, he's a funny guy. And yeah. Anyway, so going forward, you've got a book that's going to come out. I think you told me it's going to come out at the biggest week in birding at McGee Marsh in May.
It will, and I've actually created a link on my website yesterday to do a pre-sale. So if you're interested in reserving your copy, I think I'm going to do a limited run of 100 books.
Okay.
And
well, I will make sure I sign up for that right after I record this podcast today, Christian.
that sounds good. And so this is the first time I'm announcing my book's title publicly. So you are privileged to hear the title.
And it is, drumroll,
It is Falcon Freeway.
Falcon Freeway, reminiscent of Kingbird Highway.
Exactly.
Probably not an accident.
Exactly. And so for
One
me,
of my favorite books ever, by the way, Ken Kaufman, Kingbird Highway. I think I've read it 5 times.
Me
It's
too.
just so cool.
it's a beautiful story. It's told well. And the thing is that he did a big year at the end of an era. And so his story is very unique and can't be duplicated or outdone.
Right.
And so my attempt was not to, outdo Ken Kaufman, because that'll never happen.
That would not be a good choice, yes.
But I took a similar approach. And so
You did. I mean,
so it's a
you're
similar
not,
approach. in
both
a
young
different era.
guys, both kind of doing a big year on a shoestring, both
Right.
facing some financial challenges. I mean, not completely on. There are corollaries.
Yeah.
Correlations, whatever.
And so I think the title reflects that, a similar story, but in the 21st century. So
Yes.
technology is a major difference. The fact that I owned a car and was eating something.
Had a driver's license.
Had a driver's license and eating something a few notches above cat food.
Yes, yeah.
Was my story.
Yeah,
So
very cool. So what's next? What do you foresee? How do you've got a career started in the birding industry, so to speak? What's up?
So I'm right now focused on getting my book out and plan to continue marketing my book and doing talks around the country. I've been invited to speak at a couple different festivals or events, and so I'm going to pursue those leads.
Good.
And hopefully travel around the country on a book tour, or maybe you could call it a bird tour,
Yeah.
and really share my story with the birding community. And I'll be doing some guiding, both at the biggest week and then also professionally. So
I saw that you're doing guiding in Colorado and beyond, is what it says on your website.
Yes. So the
So
epicenter
if I wanted
of my,
if I wanted to hire you as a guide, how would I get a hold of you? How does that happen?
you could contact me through the Birding Project, which is very easy. Just click contact on the Birding Project,
Okay.
and that sends an email directly to my iPhone, and I'll respond to you as soon as I can. If I'm in the field, there might be a delay, but I'm usually pretty prompt about replying to emails.
I'll vouch for that.
And I have kind of a unique angle on being able to meet people and guide them other places other than Colorado. My dad is a pilot for Alaska Airlines.
Oh, wow.
And so that comes with limited flight benefits. I can buy standby tickets a little bit cheaper and fly and meet people in different destinations. So my experience birding around the country really comes
There
in.
aren't that many hot spots you haven't seen, I'm guessing.
There's very few. So there's still birds I'm learning. I don't know. Just seeing all of the birds doesn't necessarily make you an expert in
No,
all the birds.
I hear you.
but I'm still learning some areas, and no area is better than others. But Colorado has been my stomping ground since before my big year. I've really grown up in the mountains of Colorado.
So if you want a good chicken trip or a good rosy fin trip, you'd probably be a good guy to get a hold of.
Or I can suggest someone, if I'm not available, who can give you a great experience.
Cool. So you've got a book coming up. You're a guide. You're going to be a traveling speaker at bird festivals. That's a pretty good start to a birding career.
And I have an idea that is being worked on as we speak. I'm working on putting together a film about birders traveling to Attu.
Oh, wow.
And I've realized that many people, as I've gone around and spoken about my big year, people always ask me about Attu. And the price tag of such a trip usually puts going to Attu out of many people's grasp.
Yeah, that's kind of been, I'm blessed to be okay financially, but still, that's a big hit.
Yeah.
And I'm getting old, and it seems like kind of a rough place to stay.
It does. So my goal with making this documentary, this film about Attu, is to bring Attu to you. And the upcoming trip has 2 spaces left, and if I can raise the funds to fill one of those spaces, making the trip viable, I don't think it'll go unless it's a full trip. Hopefully that'll help out the big year birders such as John that are looking to go back.
John Lehman or
John Weigel?
Oh, John Weigel.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
so
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So this idea is to crowdfund a documentary film about Attu and the birds and the birders that are crazy enough to go there or go back to go there. And so
what's June?
It's the end of May and early June.
End of May, 1st of June. Okay.
So I'm going to launch that crowdfunding campaign within the next week on Kickstarter.
Very cool.
And there's different levels of perks for different levels of contributions that range from getting a postcard from Attu to receiving a digital download of the film once it's finally produced, to DVD of the film, to a private screening of the film. So
Very cool.
Audubon societies or organizations that would like me to come and speak about Attu and do a slideshow and show the film, if they contribute to that and it becomes a reality, I'll be doing that.
That sounds like a doable thing. Crowdsourcing is a great tool for lots of projects, and with your social media experience, you'll knock it dead. Good for you.
We'll see. Thank you.
Good for you. But you need 2 more people. Anyone out there want to go to Attu? Sign up.
That's right. I think it's you can Google Attu and Z Birding Tours. And it's a local Seattle-based tour company that is the only tour operator taking trips to Attu.
Now, is it a cruise now, or are they still living in the old concrete bunkers? I've heard different ways that's happening now.
I would compare it to a pelagic trip, except the boat, I believe, is 72 feet, and it has several different quarters, several different bunk rooms.
So you'd be sleeping on the boat.
So you sleep on the boat, and then you take an inflatable Zodiac onto the island every day.
That's what I suspected.
Bird all day, return to the ship for lunch.
Going to be a week tour, 2-week tour?
I think it's just over 2 weeks because it takes 4 days alone to get to
Attu. A haul
Attu.
to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a little seasick. I don't know if I could handle that.
the Bering Sea can be your friend or be your worst nightmare. So it just depends on the mood of the water.
Sounds pretty cool, though. Sounds pretty cool. So I like to wrap up by asking, do you have any advice for young birders or old birders or any birders?
Oh man, that's a great question. I always have advice, and some of it comes from me and some of it comes from other people.
Good.
But what I can think of now is really reach out and be part of your birding community. And there's a community out there. It's easy as a young birder to feel like you're the only person that likes birds or birding who's your age.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be far from the truth. It just might be not true in your immediate vision. And so I was the only person who liked birds my age growing up. But once I realized that there were hundreds of kids like me scattered all over the country, we were all brought together by young birder camps. And so my second piece of advice is, if you're a young birder, or even if you're an adult birder that's looking to network and meet like-minded people, there's a variety of birding camps, both put on by the American Birding Association and also by the National Audubon Society. So we spoke of Hog Island earlier. Hog Island offers both youth and adult programs. I'll be a counselor at a youth program this summer at a birding camp
Very cool.
for teens called From Mountains to Sea. And so we'll bird from all the way up in the tops of Maine's mountains all the way down to Hog Island and get maybe 150 or 200 species of birds. So if you're
Very
a teen
cool.
birder, I believe space is limited. It might even be full for the summer, but
What was that called again?
it's called the Mountains to Sea Teen Birding Camp.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to interject a little of my own story. Oh gosh, my wife and I were both birders, and my wife who had an advertising agency, and her photographer, Dane Meyer, lives nearby here. And he one time he came to Ken and he said, "My little girl, my daughter, Annie Meyer, is she? I think she's going to be a birder. She's like 10 years old, but she is painfully shy, and she just. Do you think you could maybe you could take Annie and me out birding someday?" So I had a van, it's minivan, and we popped them in the minivan and went birding for a day. And Annie was like crazy good. I mean, she just knew. And she had never she didn't think there was another birder on the planet, I think. And she had said maybe 6 words all day, except to identify birds that I couldn't see and things like that.
That's great.
And so we, tried to encourage her that, there's a birding community. You should meet, you should really like Charlie Wright. He's like 13 and a homeschooled birder who's just ridiculously good birder in Washington. Try to introduce her to this birding community, and she became this fabulous top. I take zero credit. She met Bruce LeBar and Charlie Wright and the Tacoma birding community, and became the most sought after. She was really cute, and the most sought after birding companion, I think, by all the young male birders in the state. And went to Humboldt and got her degree in ornithology, and is now in Central America somewhere doing great research and fabulous things. But it takes a village, and there's a village of birders out there, and you just have to meet them sometimes.
Right, and that community exists largely online.
Yes.
Now, and so the Facebook discussion groups, the networking tools that are available online, I'd say definitely look into those.
Yeah, good. Well, anyway, thank you, Christian, so much for coming to talk with me today. Any parting words you'd like to leave? Oh, I told you I'd give you a chance to read from your book, and people would love to hear that. Why don't you do that for us?
Well, we talked about Attu, and so I selected an excerpt from the Journey to Attu, and so I'll read that for you. With the eerie, vacant neighborhoods of Adak behind us, the mood hadn't changed much as we steamed through the thick mists of the Bering Sea under the fading midnight light. The Pukuk muscled through the icy chop, riding the liquid mountains up and down. Each slate-covered wave, broken by the broad bow of the 60-foot vessel, generated a booming blow, adding a concerning percussion line to the soundtrack of the engine at full throttle. Preventative seasickness medicine was passed around like candy. Each person eagerly swallowed some sort of pill or ginger product and then disappeared into their respective stateroom for the night. Left to my own decisions, I headed to my bunk and curled up under the warm flannel duvet and drifted off into a peaceful rest. The following morning, the crashing waves against the boat's bow woke me from a deep sleep. I lost my balance as I dropped off the top bunk, forgetting that the ground wasn't always in the same place on a boat. I carefully worked on standing up and walking around the ship a bit on my new sea legs. I eagerly ate a big breakfast, which was surprisingly gourmet for being prepared on a boat. Nicole, our chef for the trip, was busily cooking bacon and was taking egg orders as birders awoke and emerged from their pill-induced slumbers. Some people didn't get up at all, and I didn't see them for several days. Whale! Off our starboard side, hundreds of yards away, I spotted a dark shape breaking the surface of the water. Swarms of birders added to the grandeur of the sight. Swarms of birds added to the grandeur of the sight. At a distance, the whale seemed to linger on the surface a little too long. Why wasn't it diving? As we steamed closer and our views improved, the Leviathan morphed into a recently deceased floating island of blubber. Hundreds of fulmars were perched on and around the carcass, and a cloud of birds evaporated as the boat approached. It was a sperm whale, a large, blocky-shaped beast drunkenly tipped on one side, a floating island of food for ravenous seabirds. We stuck around long enough to take a few shots, and then the smell kicked in. We resumed our forward march towards the distant wall of fog.
Very cool. And you've got another gig as a reader. You've got a fabulous voice.
Thank
oh
you.
My goodness, I've got the squeaky old man's voice, and you've got a booming, beautiful voice. Cool.
Thank you. We'll see if an audiobook comes,
I'll make sure
comes
I
into
think-
play
I think
later.
social
in the
media
year.
into play.
accounts and
Yes, I think
podcast
that's a good
notes
idea.
below, but just tell
It's
us
a
a
good idea.
few
If you
of
want to
those.
record it, come on over.
Thank you. Instagram, The Birding Project, Twitter, @Birding Project.
Way cool. Way
So-
cool. That wraps up episode number 4 of the Bird Banter podcast, where birders talk birding. Thanks to Christian Hagenlacher as our guest today. You'll find below in the podcast notes links to many of the things we talked about today. In addition, be sure to subscribe to the Bird Banter podcast on the iTunes Store, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you find your podcast feeds. Make sure you leave comments, give me a rating, that helps, and you can find me on social media feeds. They'll be listed below. Thanks again for listening to the Bird Banter podcast. Good day, good birding.